Today on the Leukopak Lady, I'm walking through the first few of many donor factors that are proposed to influence the quality of Leukopak products for allogeneic therapy manufacturing and therapeutic success. First of all, I'm not proposing here that these factors are definitely important, but in my experience working with allogeneic cell therapy developers, these are among the most prominent factors that developers are looking for in their clinical grade donors. The first of these is donor age. So our immune systems begin to decline in our 60s, where we experience increased risk of infections and immunological disorders. However, many developers strongly prefer donors under 30 for their collections. One reason for this is because there are a few but limited reports showing that patients receiving stem cell transplants from donors over 30 had lower overall survival rates than those receiving cells from donors under 30. However, if you've ever worked in donor recruitment, you know that donors under 30 are the hardest to recruit and remain committed to donation because of how much their lifestyles change between the ages of 18 and 30. This request severely limits the donor pool and the likelihood of donor recall, so developers need to be sure that this factor is important for the success of their therapy. Next, let's talk about donor race. There's some emerging evidence to suggest that there's a racial disparity in the effectiveness of autologous CAR T therapies, with Caucasian patients experiencing significantly better survival rates compared to Asian or African American patients. However, it's unclear whether this would extend to allogeneic therapies and whether this means that all patients are better off receiving cells from Caucasian donors or whether they're better receiving race-matched cells. I tend to think that race-matched donors would be preferred. Nevertheless, Leukopak donor pools across all collectors are largely built on blood and tissue donor databases, which contain a Caucasian majority. This is definitely a question that warrants investigations by developers, and collectors would serve those developers well to have a wider racial and ethnic diversity within their Leukopak donor pools. Finally for today, let's talk about HLA type. We all know that HLA type is important for transplant matching, whether it be organ, tissue, or cellular transplants. HLA type between the donor and recipient represents the biggest challenge in transplantation, including future allogeneic cell therapies. The most obvious solution here is to expand donor databases to represent a wider range of HLA types, which pairs well with expanding racial and ethnic diversity in the donor pool. However, a growing trend in allogeneic therapy development is to engineer out the need for HLA typing by knocking out the HLA molecules in the donor cells during therapy manufacturing. And my prediction is that engineering out the HLA genes will be the winner in the long run. This approach is the best way, I think, to launch allogeneic therapies ahead of the costly and non-standardized autologous approaches. Join me on the next episode where I talk about the CMV status of the donor.